HP Lion Tamer PT-15. Have you found him? Minerva McGonagall asked as Severus Snape swept towards her. The sallow-skinned man shook his head. She had been taken to the hospital wing shortly after being found. All members of the inquisitorial squad had been sent to their common rooms, unless they were hurt badly. Only Malfoy had been taken in, as he looked as if he'd been beaten quite badly. Umbridge had been screaming bloody murder all the way to the infirmary about how much trouble Potter was in. Her ranting had gathered a large following of students who were excited to hear what Harry had done to her. Once the doors to the hospital wing shut, there went up a great cheer, and even Pomfrey had trouble hiding her smile. No one has seen him. Weasley, Granger, and the others are all missing as well. Snape scowled. The little sod likely went to the Ministry himself. We've got to. McGonagall began, but Snape waved his hand. I've already spoken to Lupin. He is gathering people as we speak. Snape said flatly, peering over his shoulder. And Albus? Snape simply shook his head. McGonagall sighed heavily and fell back into her pillows. She succumbed to a horrible hacking cough, and Madame Pomfrey bustled over from where she had just sedated Umbridge, who had not stopped screaming like a madwoman. At least he was able to restrain himself. Snape turned back to McGonagall. With all she put the boy through, it's quite a wonder that she's still able to speak. Had I been in his place, I am often surprised that he doesn't retaliate against you sometimes, Severus. McGonagall hissed as she tried to get more comfortable. I've never tortured the boy. Snape looked insulted. At McGonagall's skeptic glance, he cleared his throat, at least, not that badly. Why on earth did they go rushing off for? Potter likely felt that only he could rescue the mutt. Typical arrogance. Now isn't the time, Severus. McGonagall chastised. I would truly like know exactly what happened this afternoon. As would I. Snape said, looking darkly at Umbridge's sleeping form. The Thestrals had proven to be very swift in the air, though Harry felt he could have gotten to the Ministry much faster on his broom and alone. However, he was grateful for the company. During the trip, they all tried their best to come with some kind of strategy. When they did finally manage to get down into the Department of Mysteries, which had proven to be incredibly easy, and had made them all very leery, they hit their first obstacle. The entrance to the department was a large round room with many doors that spun whenever a door was chosen. Hermione found a way to mark all the doors they tried which were wrong, which actually made being in the spinning room a bit tougher to stomach. However, all nausea was countered by the immense amount of adrenaline pumping through their bodies. Finally they found the Hall of Prophecies, and, with wands held aloft to provide light, they began searching for Harry's godfather. The room itself was immense. There were shelves that got lost in the dark, as they were so tall, and on every single shelf, there were millions of glowing glass balls all in different sizes. Harry happened to notice that each had a tag on it, though he did not stop to read any. Is this really how prophecies are recorded? Hermione whispered. How can they even get recorded? Ron wondered. No one was there with Trelawney when she made that prediction in third year except Harry. And I didn't have anything to record it with. Harry whispered over his shoulder. Harry began looking for the numbers on the rows, counting them down as they got closer and closer to where he had seen Sirius was being held. With every step, Harry began to get the feeling that there were eyes on him. Several times he stopped the group to look around in all directions. They could find no trace of anyone else, and continued onward. Harry was unable to shake the feeling of foreboding that was rising within his chest. At row 95, Harry and his friends all turned the corner to find nothing. Harry said incredulously. He was supposed to be here. Right here. The others spread out, all of them looking for any sign that anyone else had been there. Harry was starting to feel really foolish now. Questions flooded his mind now. What was the purpose of showing him that scene? Did Voldemort truly have Sirius, or was it all just a trick, and if so, what had been the point? Why draw him here to this place at all? Harry. Harry turned to see Daphne, Neville, and Hermione standing next the shelf, all of them staring at one of the softly glowing orbs. It has your name on it. What? Harry came over, and lifted the tag to see that his name was indeed on it, as was Voldemort's. The prophecy had been made the year before he'd been born, though he didn't know who had made it, as it was only the initial. However, he thought he might know who it was made to. Only one person he knew of had that many initials in their name. I think it was made to Dumbledore. Harry said softly. I wonder what it says. Ron said, having now joined the rest of them, Tracy next to him. Perhaps we can help with that. The teens all spun to see someone approaching them. He had a dark hood, and a decorative metal mask covering his face, but there was no mistaking the voice. Malfoy. Harry said, raising his wand. I'd put that down, if I were you. You are surrounded, and we don't need things to get messy. Lucius Malfoy sniggered as he removed his mask. Malfoy wasn't lying. Harry could see 2 Death Eaters approaching from his left, and another 2 coming from the right. Hermione gave a gasp, and Harry knew there were more behind them. Do as we ask, and you can all back to school. All we want is that prophecy. Please take it down from the shelf, and kindly hand it over. Why don't you take it? Harry asked, trying to think fast. Foolish boy. Malfoy chuckled, keeping his wand leveled at Harry, who hadn't lowered his own. Only 4 people can remove it, the person who made it, the person who witnessed it, or the 2 people to which it refers. You can't truly believe the Dark Lord would dare step foot in the Ministry when they've been kind enough to ignore his return. So, Sirius. Harry began, his gut twisting in bitter anger at being so easily fooled. Is likely still hidden in whatever rat trap he has been for the last few years. Enough talk, Potter. The prophecy, if you please. What assurance do I have that you'll let us go? Harry asked, fearing he knew the answer. None. But I can guarantee that if you refuse, we will kill your friends while you watch. I've had a good life. Ron shouted bravely. I like that one, he's got spirit he has. Behind Malfoy a very thin woman with heavy-lidded arc eyes emerged from the shadows. You bitch. Neville made to lunge, but Ron, Hermione, Tracy and Daphne all restrained him. Is that baby Longbottom? You've really grown up, haven't you? Mummy and Daddy must be so very proud. Do they recognize you at all? The woman taunted. Now, Bellatrix, let's not make things harder. I'm going to ask you one last time, Potter. Retrieve the prophecy and bring it to me. Malfoy said firmly. Harry began thinking quickly now. The prophecy was safe where it rested. So long as he didn't take it, Voldemort would not have it. At the same time, if he didn't hand it over, he and his friends would surely not get out of there alive. Slowly, keeping his eyes on Malfoy and Bellatrix, Harry reached up and slowly grasped the glowing orb. It was cool to his touch, and hummed slightly in his hand. It was incredibly light as well. Harry thought he could crush it with his bare hands, and that gave him an idea. He passed Daphne and whispered, Reductos on my word. What's to stop me from smashing it right here? He asked, trying to buy time. Malfoy actually laughed. Because it holds all the answers. Haven't you ever wondered why the Dark Lord chose to go after a child? A child of seemingly little consequence to his greatness. Haven't you ever wondered why your parents had to die? The answers are there, in your hand. Voldemort thinks the answer to killing me is in this, doesn't he? Don't say his name with your filthy mouth. Bellatrix hissed. You filthy half-blood, you are unworthy. Unworthy? Do you know anything about the bastard? His father was a muggle. He's no more pure blood than I am. Harry snapped. You dare? Bellatrix asked with shock. She raised her wand, curse on her lips, when Lucius batted her hand away. You know the Dark Lord's decree. His word is law. Potter is to be untouched. Harry looked sharply at Malfoy, who had brought his mask of boredom back over his face, and held out his hand for the prophecy. Bellatrix looked like a dog who'd just been kicked, and sank back a step, eyeing Harry with disdain. Harry alone was to be left alone. Kill the spare. Those horrible words echoed in his mind then, and Harry's mind saw his friends lying all around him, eyes wide and accusing, asking why he had led them to their deaths. Daphne, the girl he had fallen in love with, staring blankly at him as he held her limp form in his arms. He had led them into this trap. It was his responsibility to get them all out of there alive. But at what cost? Allowing Voldemort the prophecy, and potentially the greatest weapon he could ever hope for? Harry knew he had no choice, he had to get his friends out of there, and if he couldn't take the prophecy as well, he would smash it, so no one would know what it said. I'm getting tired of waiting, Potter. Malfoy's tone was now menacing. Get used to it, Malfoy. Now. The Death Eaters were ready for Potter and his friends to try and escape, however, they had thought the curses would be directed at their person. They hadn't expected the curses to be aimed at the shelves of prophecies. Harry shot forward, shoving Malfoy into a collapsing shelf, where dozens of prophecies smashed on his head. Bellatrix leveled her wand and shot a few hexes, but Harry had his shield up. He raced forward, and just before he reached the crazed witch, dropped to the floor and slid, using his legs to knock Bellatrix Lestrange onto her face. Harry felt hands pulling him up, and began to fight until he heard Daphne shouting at him to get moving. Clutching the prophecy, Harry ran headlong down the row, looking for the exit. Occasionally he would glance over his shoulder to make sure that his friends were still with him. This way! Hermione shouted. They all turned down another long row, running as fast as they could. They heard the Death Eaters coming after them. Harry thought he saw the outline of a door up ahead, but he wasn't sure. He wasn't about to stop running. There was an explosion just ahead. One of the pursuing Death Eaters had fired a curse, splintering a nearby shelf. More prophecies began raining down, popping as they shattered upon the floor. Harry skidded to a halt, his friends colliding with him. Go! Harry shouted. He turned to his left, hoping to put some distance between himself and his pursuers. There! Daphne shouted. Harry saw it as well. A door that was sitting ajar. Warm light spilled out, and Harry guessed this had been where the Death Eaters had come. Pouring on more speed, Harry reached the door first and slipped inside. Daphne followed, and Ron as well. Where are the others? Harry asked with panic. He started to peer around the door when a bright purple spell impacted the wall next to the door. Shut it! Daphne screamed. Harry reacted before he thought about it, and slammed the door shut. Ron grabbed the edge of a nearby desk and began pushing it towards the door. Harry quickly helped Ron, and soon they had 2 desks and a few chairs piled against the door. Are you 2 wizards or what? Daphne asked, slightly hysterically. She waved her hand in an intricate pattern and the door gave a weird squishing noise. "It'll only hold them off for a little bit," she said, gasping for air. "We've got to find the others," Harry said flatly. "And then we need to get the hell out of here." "No arguments here, mate." Ron nodded. There was pounding on the other side of the door, and Harry heard two gruff voices cursing. There was a muffled voice, and a loud bang against the door. "We need to leave, now," Daphne said, grabbing Harry's hand. The three teens found a door on the other side of the office and quickly slipped through. Daphne performed the same spell and turned to find herself, Ron and Harry in a very large room with a long row of shelves, with tiny hourglasses suspended in gold rings. "Time turners," Harry said. At the end of the room was a large bell jar with a fluttering bird. It flew to the top, when its feathers began to fall out and disappear. Harry and Ron started forward to investigate, but Daphne, being far more aware of their situation, and not so easily distracted, grabbed them both. "Hey! Death Eaters chasing us? Are friends still missing? How can you be so thick?" "Right." Harry nodded. "Okay, we've got 3 doors to choose from." "Everyone grab a door," Daphne said, and headed off to the door farthest from the one they had come through. She opened it and peeked inside. At the same time, Harry and Ron had both opened doors. "Wrong door," Ron shouted, slamming his closed right away. "Daphne." Daphne ran over and sealed the door. There were 2 heavy thuds and a shriek of frustration. "I'm going to rip their eyes out," Bellatrix shouted. "This way," Malfoy Sr. said. "Harry, what have you got?" Ron huffed. "A room with a weird-looking aquarium. I think I remember this from earlier." "You think it was one of the rooms we saw from that first room?" Daphne asked, jogging over to peer inside. Harry began to step over the threshold when a door on the other side of the room burst open, and 2 Death Eaters came through, firing spells. The door was smashed, and Harry and Daphne stumbled back into the Time Turner room, looking for cover. The Death Eaters moved fast, and were now coming into the Time Turner room. Daphne dove over a large desk and cast a tripping jinx from underneath it. Both Ron and Harry fired spells at the 2 robed figures who ducked back to avoid getting hit. "Oxio," one of the Death Eaters began to cast, but Daphne aimed her wand and shouted, "Aguamenti." The Death Eater was suddenly choking on a mouthful of water. He had to remove his mask, and Harry recognized him as the executioner who had been sent to kill Buckbeak 2 years ago. The second Death Eater came around to fire a spell, but slipped in the pool of water. "Conf Ringo," Ron shouted, and the floor where the Death Eaters were exploded. Harry heard one of them scream, and the doorway was now clouded with dust and smoke. "This way," Daphne said, getting to her feet and moving the door she had checked out earlier. Harry and Ron wasted no time and dove through behind Daphne, who sealed it behind her. "Lumos," Harry said. The room was sparsely furnished, and there sat many tables against the walls. It was too dark to see what was on them, and Harry, remembering what Daphne had scolded him for a little while ago, didn't think this was a good time to check. "Look for a door." "There you are." Lucius Malfoy had opened a door to Harry's right. He whipped his wand up, but found himself flying through the air back the way he came. Harry turned as Daphne rushed forward to seal the door. "Banishment charm," she gave a weak smile. "I love you." Harry couldn't help but grin in return. "Right, there's a lot of love here, and even I have the W fuzzies," Ron said, a strange goofy grin on his face. "When we get back to Hogwarts, I'm going to snog Lavender until she can't stand up, but right now. Right, we gotta get moving. Harry smiled shyly, offering his hand to Daphne, who blushed as she took it. Come on, you two. Ron motioned towards a door on the far side of the room. Slowly, taking their time, and staring into each other's eyes, Harry and Daphne followed Ron, who opened the door, and took a peek inside. Once they shut the door behind them, and Daphne sealed it once again, the strange warmth they had all felt in the last room melted away a bit. Okay, what in the name of Morgana was that? Daphne asked. I don't know, but I think we should get moving. Hey. Ron said, looking around them. This is the room next to the time turners. Look. Ron pointed to where he had blasted out the floor. Dust still hung in the air, but it was clear that he'd managed to hit at least one of the Death Eaters. There was a lot of blood on the floor, and a metal Death Eater mask. This place is starting to annoy me. Daphne huffed. There was a crash and several screams. The three looked up as a door opposite them opened and Neville fell through, holding onto Hermione, while Tracy covered them, firing spells. Harry, Daphne, and Ron all went to their aid. Harry saw Malfoy and Bellatrix taking cover behind several heavy bookshelves. Once their friends were inside, Harry slammed the door shut and Daphne sealed it. Tracy then cast a few spells, reinforcing it. Harry turned to see Neville holding Hermione, who looked ashen-faced. There was blood staining her side, and Neville looked very worried. Set her down, Neville. Tracy said, just as there were several loud bangs against the door. Neville slowly eased Hermione onto the floor, winced as she hissed in pain. I think it was a piercing hex. Hermione whispered as Tracy lifted the girl's shirt to examine the wound. This is going to really hurt. Tracy said, aiming her wand at the wound. Closero. Hermione shrieked as Tracy did her best to heal her wound. Neville held her tightly so she didn't move too much. Daphne gripped Harry's arm as they watched Hermione being tended to. In a moment, Tracy finished. I'm no Madame Pomfrey, but I think it'll be okay. Tracy tried to smile. We need to get her out of here. She lost a lot of blood. Harry took a quick look around. There were 3 doors left to choose in this room, which was the largest one they'd been in yet. Can she walk? I'm not dead. Hermione scowled as Neville gingerly helped her to stand. She did look very weak in Harry's opinion. Get me out of here now, she said sternly. Well, this visit has made me certain of one thing, Ron said as they began to move. I never want to be an unspeakable Expelliarmus. The teens suddenly found their wands flying out of their hands as 2 Death Eaters came crashing through one of the doors. Harry shoved Daphne to the floor behind a large desk, while the others ducked behind the large aquarium. Harry reached into his pocket for the wand he'd taken off of Malfoy earlier, and Daphne plucked up her own spare. Harry turned and saw the others doing the same, and Ron had enlarged the sword he'd brought. Petrificus totalis. Harry shouted, jumping up and aiming his spell at the door. The Death Eaters were no longer there, though they were surprised that Harry had a second wand. Harry could see clearly that the spell was nowhere near as powerful as if he'd cast with his own wand, but at that moment, it was better than nothing. Incar. Silencio. Tracy shouted, popping out from behind the aquarium. The Death Eater clutched his throat, and turned his wand on Tracy, who had disappeared. Daphne jumped up and the Death Eater quickly took aim. Suddenly everything slowed down for Harry. There was a flash of purple and Daphne's eyes went wide. She looked at Harry as if she had never seen him before, and then she fell. No. Harry shouted, grabbing her hand. He shook her hard, trying to get her to open her eyes. Flashes of spells lit the room, while Neville, Tracy, and Ron returned fire, but no one seemed to be getting anywhere. "They've got backup coming," Neville shouted. Harry stared helplessly at his girlfriend, and a surge of fierce fury ripped through his body. He stood up and fired several reducto curses in rapid succession. One of them hit the Death Eater who had cursed Daphne right between the eyes. His head exploded in a crimson spray. His fellow tried to return fire, but Neville hit him in the gut with a stunner. Tracy shut the door with a wave, and sealed it, as she had been with every other door she had come through, just as Daphne had done. The blonde girl quickly came to the side of her best friend and checked her pulse. After a second she let out a sigh. "She's alive. Do you know what he hit her with?" she asked. "I've never seen it before." Harry shook his head. "Here," Ron said, shoving Harry's wand in his hand. He had collected their wands from where they had fallen and was returning them to their owners. "This door is sealed," Neville said, trying one of the two remaining doors. Ron hurried over to the last door and opened it slowly. "This way's clear," he said. Neville hurried and helped Hermione to her feet, while Harry and Tracy heft the unconscious Daphne up. "Let's get out of here." Ron waved them all on. The next room looked like a stone arena, like something out of Greek mythology. The teens emerged on the bottom of the cavernous circular room. Set in the center was a raised dais with a large archway carved out of stone. In the arch hung a thin black veil, tattered and dirty. "Where are we now?" Hermione asked weakly. "No idea," Ron answered. "Do you hear that?" Neville asked, looking all around. The room was clearly empty, except for the six of them, but Harry heard it as well. Whispers. "What is it?" Harry asked. "What are you talking about?" Ron asked, confusion evident on his face. "This really isn't the time to go mental," Tracy said. "Look for a door." At that instant, a door several levels above them opened. Lucius Malfoy entered. "Stop." "Go," Harry said, heaving Daphne along with him. They were stopped almost at once as another masked Death Eater emerged from around the arch's platform. It was the executioner. His hair was still wet, and he looked quite angry. Harry turned to go another way, but stopped dead when he saw Bellatrix Lestrange. She had a hold of Tracy, who had run into her in her attempt to find a way out. "Wands on the floor if you please," she smiled. "We've had our fun. Time to take our medicine." Lucius and 3 more Death Eaters joined the group. "You all did quite well," Malfoy said smoothly. "You actually killed Dolohov. That in itself is impressive. But it's over now. Hand us the prophecy, and we'll make your deaths quick." "What happened to going free?" Ron asked. "That was before you decided to play heroes," Malfoy replied cheekily. Harry looked at Neville, who was holding Hermione up. Hermione shook her head, while Neville looked as if he was preparing himself. Harry heard Tracy whimper, and saw that Bellatrix had produced a small dagger which she held to Tracy's throat. Harry could see the faintest trickle of blood where Bellatrix was pressing the blade. There was nowhere left to run, and no more options left to him. Daphne was hurt, and possibly dying. Hermione needed help as well. If he didn't do something quick, Tracy could be killed. He gave in. They would all die anyway. Harry needed to do something. The idea popped into his head, and Harry tried to shake it away. Yet, it was the only way he could save his friends. With a heavy sigh, he looked to Malfoy Sr., and with a resigned tone, began to speak. "I'll make you a deal, Malfoy. My friends leave. They get out of here and go free, and you get the prophecy and me." "Harry, no," Tracy said, flicking her eyes to Daphne's limp form, which Harry was holding too tightly. Harry knew exactly what she was trying to say. Daphne would have kicked him very hard for even contemplating the idea of giving himself up. But what other choice did he actually have? Daphne was hurt, maybe even dying. Hermione was very weak from blood loss. Tracy could be killed at any moment, and they had no escape now. They were surrounded. "You'd really turn yourself over to us?" Malfoy asked, obviously not believing his luck. Harry nodded, glancing around at the other Death Eaters. "They all go free. When I know they're all safe." "I'll come with you," Harry confirmed. "The Dark Lord would reward us most generously," one of the hooded Death Eaters said. Harry saw it was the one who'd gotten a face full of water from Daphne. His chest felt like it was being compressed, and he was starting to feel short of breath. "Do it, Lucius," another shouted from across the arena. "The Dark Lord doesn't care about these whelps. He just wants Potter." "Shut up," Lucius shouted, still staring at Harry. "What do you say, Lucius?" Harry asked, shifting Daphne's weight a bit to reach into his pocket and pull out the glowing orb out. He had stuffed it there earlier during the chase, and was surprised it hadn't been smashed. Harry held it up to show that he was serious. Malfoy stared at the softly glowing sphere in hypnotic contemplation. He'd be a fool to refuse. If returned to Hidlord with the prophecy and Potter, what wouldn't his master give him? "Harry," Hermione whispered, tears falling from her eyes. Neville gave her a reassuring gentle squeeze, as he witnessed his greatest friend preparing to sacrifice himself for them all. "All right, Potter," Malfoy said, a look of triumph on his chiseled face. "Your friends can leave. I'll have them escorted out, and once my people return with word that they have left safe and sound, you will come with me to see the Dark Lord." "Avery, not Mulciber." "One," Harry said quickly. "Only one of them goes." "I don't trust you, Malfoy." "All right then. Avery, please escort these young people to the Floo." "Is that all right with you, Potter?" Harry nodded his head slowly. Then something caught his eye. A movement that was so fast, he wasn't sure he had truly seen it. A blur of movement falling from above to land next to Bellatrix. Suddenly Tracy was free, and stumbling towards him. Harry nearly lost his balance and dropped Daphne to the ground as Tracy grabbed him to right herself. Bellatrix was now on the ground, scrambling to get to her feet, and standing in front of Lucius Malfoy, a look of grim fury on his face. Was Harry's godfather. "He's not going anywhere with you, Lucius." There was a crack and Malfoy was stumbling backwards holding his face. Blood splashed on his cheek, and Harry thought for sure that Sirius had broken Malfoy's nose. Everything sped up exponentially then. Harry dragged Daphne behind the raised platform as the arena exploded in spell work. Neville was setting Hermione down as well, while Ron covered them, firing spells at Death Eaters. Tracy scrambled over to join them, and checked her best friend's pulse again. Looking around, Harry saw a few familiar faces. Tonks was fighting side by side with Remus against two of the Death Eaters, while Moody and Shacklebolt were taking on another pair. Sirius and Malfoy had begun dueling, and to Harry's great surprise, Madame Bones was locked in combat with Bellatrix Lestrange. "Get them out of here!" Sirius shouted over his shoulder. Harry wasn't about to leave his godfather. Not after everything else. Double-checking that Daphne and the others were safe for the moment, he leapt up and joined his only family in battle against Malfoy, who looked determined to end Sirius' life. "I said get out of here," Sirius admonished. "Not on your life. I came here to get you," Harry shouted, dodged a hex from Malfoy. "I'm fine," Sirius shouted back. "You should never have come here in the first place." Harry knew that his godfather was right, but he had believed Sirius to be in danger. Harry cleared his head. They could discuss it later. They had to deal with the problem at hand. Harry saw Bellatrix running towards where his friends were. Madame Bones was lying on the floor, still as the grave. Harry didn't hesitate. He chased the Mad Witch as she rounded the platform and aimed her wand. Before she managed to get a spell off, Harry crashed into her, the prophecy slipping out of his hand and rolling away. Both Harry and Bellatrix got to their feet and squared off. "I'm going to teach you how to play properly. I'm quite good, you know. Just ask Longbottom's parents." Reducto. The spell smashed the wall just behind Bellatrix's head. The woman covered herself, and turned to see Neville bearing down on her. Ron was at his side, both had their wands leveled. Bellatrix gave a long cackle of laughter, and began firing spells with blinding speed. Both boys managed to erect shields and stave off most of her attacks. Harry took advantage and fired a few choice curs, but Bellatrix proved to be quicker with a wand. "Is that the best you've got, Longbottom? Poor Mummy and Daddy must be so ashamed of their squib son," Bellatrix taunted. Harry saw Neville's face contort in anger as he threw more spells at the witch, who deflected them as if it were child's play, cackling madly as she danced with them. There were screams around Harry, and he wanted to see who it was, but Bellatrix had sent a series of bright curses in his direction. Harry got his shield up in time, but got his shoulder clipped by a cutting hex. Ron and Neville got her attention again, and Harry tried to maneuver around the insane witch, when he saw the glowing orb rolling past him. He tried to grab it, but it slipped past and into the hands of Lucius Malfoy. Harry could see Sirius slumped against the far wall, and guessed Malfoy had managed to get the better of his godfather. Sirius's head rose up, and relief poured through Harry. Sirius was still alive, but Malfoy had the prophecy. Thinking quickly, Harry reached into his jeans pocket and pulled the shrunken sword from within. A quick finite and the sword was normal-sized again. Lucius held the prophecy up, observing it in triumphant glee, forgetting where he was, and what was happening around him. He still had a lot of blood coming from his nose, and smeared on his face, giving him a far more sinister look as he smiled gleefully at having gotten his prize. That all changed when he felt a sharp, burning pain in his wrist. He blinked once, twice, 3 times, not believing what he was seeing. His hand, still holding the prophecy, was falling away from his arm. The hand turned and spun wildly as it fell away, bouncing twice as it hit the floor, the prophecy skittering away. Lucius turned to see Harry Potter smiling at him, a gleaming steel blade in his hand. Potter had just cut off his hand. You. He stammered. "Was that your wand hand? Because I'm offering a 2-for-1 special," Harry said, a maniacal glint in his eye. Lucius swatted with his left hand, smacking Harry away. Harry stumbled back a few steps, dropping the sword. He caught himself and turned in time to see Malfoy leaping towards the prophecy. Harry moved quickly. Taking aim, he shouted the first spell that came to mind. Conf Ringo. The prophecy and much of the floor around it went up in a loud cracking boom that shook the room. "No!" Malfoy screamed, his stump reaching for where the prophecy had been only a split second before. Harry saw that Sirius was getting to his feet again, and looked to be trying to shake away the cobwebs. Relief flooded over Harry as it became clear that his godfather had been stunned, or simply hit his head. Suddenly his godfather's face went deathly pale. Harry stared in confusion for a moment before turning around to see what had made his godfather so frightened. Bellatrix Lestrange had overcome Neville and Ron and was striding towards Harry. Harry began to raise his wand, just as Bellatrix incanted her spell. Harry could see her mouth forming the words that were meant to end his life. He knew his shield wouldn't protect him, and he was sure he wouldn't be able to dodge it. Harry only hoped that death wouldn't hurt. The killing curse smashed into the wall to the left of Sirius. A large broken piece of rock hit the most wanted fugitive in all of magical Britain in the skull, knocking him flat. Harry looked to see that Ron had smacked Bellatrix's wand away. The witch's eyes went wide with anger, and she spun on her heel to face the grinning redhead. Ron took a step back to prepare to duel again when Bellatrix rushed forward, shoving her fist up under Ron's chin. Ron's smile faded immediately, and blood began to seep from out of his mouth, though he couldn't open it anymore. Tears began spilling from his eyes, and he gave a horrible whimper. "No!" Harry whispered in disbelief as he stared in frozen horror at his friend. His brother in all but blood stared woefully back at him. Bellatrix twisted her fist and Harry saw the dagger slip out of Ron's jaw, blood covering the witch's hand. She jeered at Harry, who could only stand there rather dumbfounded. Ron wavered on his feet, and the crumpled into a heap on the floor, spasming and choking on blood. "Ron! No! Not Ron! Harry, are you? Remus, look out! Ha ha ha! Remember the last time we danced, Alastair?" "Dumbledore!" More shouting erupted, but Harry heard none of it. He wasn't sure if Dumbledore had arrived, or someone was threatening to call him. None of it mattered. Not when his friend lay on the ground before him, dead. Only one thing mattered to Harry now. Only one thing needed to be done. Bellatrix Lestrange was slinking out of the arena, hoping not to be noticed. Harry didn't hesitate, or even bother to tell anyone where he was going. He simply moved. The final image of Ron's face etched forever in his mind's eye. Ron's pleading, sad expression, blood slipping between his pale lips. His friend. One of his first real friends. Murdered. Harry wasn't alone. Running just behind him was Neville, who was bleeding from several cuts on his face. His left eye was swollen shut and horribly purple. They followed Bellatrix through several rooms, trying in vain to stun her, or slow her down, but the crazed woman always seemed a step ahead of them. They ran back through the Time Turner room. Bellatrix fired several spells, which the boys deflected. Harry had the brief vision of the spells smashing the Time Turners, but his focus was on the retreating witch. Bellatrix led them through several more rooms, taunting them all the while. Neville looked to be struggling with his spell work as his anger rose. His spells were going astray, and his voice was cracking with each incantation. Bellatrix dove through a door and slammed the door behind her. Harry slammed against it, and Neville crashed into him. The door they had come through shut behind them and the room begun to spin. "Now we find the room," Neville snapped. "Where the hell is the exit?" Harry shouted, barely hearing Neville's quip. The room suddenly stopped spinning and a door to their left opened. Harry looked at Neville, who looked just as surprised as Harry felt. There was a pause and the two boys took off running. They found themselves in the giant lobby of the Ministry of Magic. They could hear Bellatrix's cold, cruel laughter ahead of them. They rounded a corner, and saw her skipping towards a line of fireplaces. "Crucio!" Harry shouted, not even thinking. He just wanted her to hurt. To pay for what she'd done to Ron. Bellatrix was thrown up in the air, crashing hard against the marble floor. She began laughing hysterically, rolling to a sitting position. Harry. Neville looked at his friend with fright. Don't even pretend you don't want to do it to her, Harry said, not taking his eyes off the still cackling witch. Neville turned back to Bellatrix, and he knew that Harry was right. If he were honest with himself, he'd dreamt of torturing the woman responsible for ruining his life. The witch who'd stolen his parents' lives? The concern melted away from his face, replaced by righteous indignation. He raised his wand at Bellatrix's heart, ready to end the woman's life. You truly think you're ready to play with me? Bellatrix gasped. You silly little boys, you have to mean it. You have to truly want to cause pain. You have to really want to hurt. Then maybe I should give it a try. Neville hissed. Try it, boy. You might like it. Bellatrix said, getting to her knees and licking her lips seductively. She clutched at her chest, her bosom heaving in anticipation. Neville began shifting his weight, his eyes flickering between Harry and Bellatrix. He felt sweat on his forehead, and his hands felt clammy. Take your vengeance. It wasn't Bellatrix who spoke. In fact, she suddenly looked frightened. Her eyes bulged as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. Harry felt a cold fear crawl up his spine, just as his scar began burning. The pain was blinding, yet he remained rigidly set, ready to end Bellatrix's life. She drove them insane, and robbed you of what was rightfully yours. The voice said smoothly. She killed your friend, Harry. Why should it not be you to end her life in return? Harry's vision began to blur as his scar ached. He could feel the presence behind him, feel the breath of death on the back of his neck, hands hovering over his shoulders. You know the spell. It said lovingly. Take your vengeance. Take back what was taken. No. Neville shouted, turning to face the spectre, only to be banished away as if he were nothing more than a speck of dirt. Bellatrix clapped with glee as Neville sailed past her, her mad eyes dancing with childish delight. So pathetic. Such a shame. The voice sighed. But not you, Harry Potter. Harry was covered in sweat now. He was screaming inside his head for his muscles to move. All he could do was stare at Bellatrix's smiling face and hold his wand as steady as possible. He gritted his teeth, struggling against himself. Take her life, the voice urged. Avada Kedavra. Harry shouted. He spun himself, hoping the spell would connect with the Dark Lord. Bellatrix actually slid away, fearing she might be hit with the killing curse, only to begin laughing once again when she saw how weak the spell was, and see Harry knocked to the floor by her lord. I had such hope for you, Harry. Lord Voldemort sighed, circling his prey. I knew Longbottom would never be able to do it, but you have such fire in you. I have seen your heart, Harry Potter. Harry backed away, but Lord Voldemort stalked him like a savage beast. Bellatrix watched, fascinated by her master's technique. She felt heat within her chest, and her breathing was deep and heavy. She got to her feet so that she could follow, to witness her lord's triumph. There was a new noise. Behind her, coming closer. A shout of rage. Bellatrix turned to look and found the Longbottom boy sprinting towards her. Before she could get her wand up, Neville had leapt into the air, smashing into her. The two sprawled out on the floor, struggling to pin the other. Bellatrix clawed at Neville's face, while he tried to punch any part of her he could. Neville found himself on top of the crazed murderer when he felt a pain that no man should ever have to suffer. Bellatrix's eyes delighted in Neville's red, pained face, as he slumped over. She quickly rolled on top of him and licked his face. I could survive on nothing but your suffering, boy. So sweet, like chocolate, she whispered. Straddling him, she rose up, and shook out her tangled mass of black hair, wiping her mouth with the back of her sleeve. The hesitation gave Neville an opening, and he brought his fists together to hit her in the face. There was a crunch, and Bellatrix fell backward off of him. Shrieking with rage, Bellatrix hoisted her arm, only to suddenly realize she did not have her wand. During the struggle, both combatants had lost their weapons. Neville realized at the same moment that he was unarmed, forgetting completely about the spare wand in his pocket. He looked and saw Bellatrix's wand next to his hand. As she dove for it, Neville quickly snatched it up. She grabbed onto it, and they struggled for command of the wand. Red sparks shot out of the end, singeing them both. Bellatrix, growing weary of the fight, reached up and clawed at Neville's face, scratching at his eyes. Neville howled, but kept his hands firmly locked on the wand, not wishing to let this thing win. Bellatrix shrieked as she used on hand to claw at the boy's face. She twisted her other hand every which way, trying to loosen the boy's grip on her wand. Still, he held tightly. Bellatrix used all her might to push Neville back and away. The move caught him off guard a bit, and he stumbled. This gave the insane woman the opening she needed, and for the second time, kicked Neville between the legs. Neville dropped like a stone, gasping for air. Bellatrix stood triumphantly, hefting her wand over her head, aiming it right for Neville. She was going to savor this. She stalked towards him, eyes wide, chest heaving. She ran her finger over her breasts, delighting at the tingling she felt. Inflicting pain always got her excited. Slowly she straddled Neville, who stared in defiance at her. Tears were streaming from his eyes as the pain in his groin was making it very difficult to breathe. He spread his arms out, hoping he might find an opening to strike, when his hand felt something. Something that would end the fight. "I'm deeply sorry for having to play so rough." Bellatrix smiled as she settled herself on Neville's hips. She bent forward and took his lips in hers, tugging on his bottom lip. "You've been a lot of fun, and later tonight, I will remember you in the privacy of my bedroom." Neville shuddered at the image. "But playtime is most definitely over." She raised her wand over her head, aiming the tip at Neville's chest. Her eyes flitted as a wide, orgasmic smile spread on her thin, gaunt face. "Goodbye, Neville Longbottom." Neville clutched the dagger that had fallen from Bellatrix's bodice during their fight, and shoved it right into her throat. Bellatrix's expression was puzzled as her fingers grasped feebly at Neville's fingers, wrapped tightly around the blade's handle. She looked down at her intended victim, who actually looked a bit shocked at what he'd done. His arm was trembling, though it remained firm, pressing the blade deeper into her throat. She tried to take a breath, but began to choke on blood. Her wand fell to the floor with a light clatter, and Bellatrix fell the opposite way with a thud. Neville slipped out from underneath the woman who had for so long haunted his family, and his own dreams. Bellatrix Lestrange, the witch who had tortured his parents to insanity, lay at his feet, reaching out to him, begging silently for what? Mercy. Forgiveness. Pity. She gave another deep, wet cough, her hands going to the knife in her neck. Blood was spilling from the wound like a river. The pool of the life-giving fluid spread out around her, and Neville stepped back as it expanded, hypnotized by what he had done. Her eyelids flitted and then closed. She gave 2 more very wet-sounding breaths before becoming still, her eyes closing once and for all. Bellatrix Lestrange was dead. Voldemort was not aware of the fight going on behind him. He had his prey, and he was ready to end this farce once and for all. Potter had been a serious thorn in his side for well over 14 years. This boy, this pathetic weakling of a child had all but destroyed him. He had failed to destroy this boy several times now. And this latest injustice, Potter had destroyed the one thing that held the answer to killing the boy. The prophecy was gone, blasted into nothingness. You've proven to be extremely lucky, Potter. You and your friends should be most proud of what you managed. Evading my best Death Eaters, and even managing to kill one. But your luck has no run out. I doing to kill you now. No speeches, no games. Just the vast emptiness of death. Avada Kedavra. The spell never hit Harry, because he was violently pushed aside. Where he had been a moment before, there was now a large crater. Voldemort looked to his right where Potter was looking just as confused as the Dark Lord felt, and then to his left to see the one man he'd hoped not to have to encounter. Good evening, Tom. Dumbledore. Voldemort hissed. Dumbledore gave a polite nod at his adversary. The Aurors are on their way, Tom. They shall be here within moments. I only need a single moment to kill you, old man. I have become far more powerful than you could ever hope to be in 1,000 lifetimes. I shall be interested to see if your boasts hold up, Tom. Do not use that name. Voldemort grimaced. But, it is your name. It shall always be, as much as you wish to forget. Dumbledore cocked his head, a grim smirk twitching at his mouth. Harry watched the interplay between arguably the two greatest wizards ever known. Harry had heard of Dumbledore's awesome power, and he suddenly realized that he was about to see it firsthand. Voldemort moved first. Harry swore he hadn't even waved his wand. Dumbledore hadn't seemed to move either as he deflected Voldemort's first volley. The dark spell smashed into the walls, leaving long scratches in the marble. Dumbledore gave a great wave of his arm, and the very air rippled. Voldemort raised a shield and Dumbledore's spell hit it with a loud ringing gong. Harry had to cover his ears at the sound. Do you not seek to kill me, Dumbledore? Do you still believe that everyone can be saved? Voldemort hissed, readying his wand for another strike. His arm slashed down and a bright crimson burst soared at Dumbledore, who did a strange sort of spin out of the spell's path. Voldemort didn't wait and conjured a large group of floating spikes, which he sent at the old wizard. Dumbledore actually looked bored as flicked his own wand, turning the spikes into nothing more dangerous than butterflies. Is this the limit of you great new power? Dumbledore asked. I was doing these cheap party tricks when I was little older than Harry. The insult seemed to touch a nerve, and Voldemort held his wand to his lipless mouth and breath out. A long tongue of flame arose, making Voldemort look like a dragon. The flame grew, and rose in the air, looking very much like a serpent. The flame creature struck at Dumbledore, appearing to swallow the old man before it suddenly burst outward and fade into nothing. Dumbledore stood exactly as he had been before, though his robes looked a bit singed. Harry suddenly realized that he'd been all but forgotten, and that he had an opening. He rose to his feet, clutching his wand tightly. Dip Indo. The spell caught the Dark Lord between the shoulders, and he gave a shout, not of pain, but annoyance. He turned to stare coldly at Harry, who stared fiercely back. The Dark Lord flicked his wand at Harry, and Harry was knocked head over heels. Dumbledore took advantage of Voldemort's distraction and cracked a whip of flame from the tip of his wand, catching the Dark Lord across the shoulder. Voldemort recoiled a step and his wand flashed. A jet of poisonous green light flew through the air at Dumbledore, who dove out of the way. Harry was actually surprised to see the man move so agilely. Two more streaks of green head towards Dumbledore, who was prepared this time, conjuring a very thick stone wall. The spell smashed away large chunks of the stone, which Dumbledore then sent at Voldemort. The rock sailed right through the Dark Lord, who had changed himself into smoke for an instant. "You cannot kill me, Dumbledore." Voldemort laughed. "I am immortal. Simply killing you would give me no satisfaction, Tom. I intend to destroy every part of you." Harry didn't understand what Dumbledore was saying, but Voldemort seemed to. His laughter stopped and he cocked his head. A terrible sound began in Voldemort's chest and rose up his throat. The Dark Lord roared at Dumbledore, like an angered beast, and he sent a trio of killing curses at the old man. Harry didn't see what happened because his focus was on the Dark Lord, who was now stalking towards him. Harry raised his wand and sent every spell he could think of at his enemy, who simply waved them off as nothing so troublesome as a pesky feather. "Let us see how far Dumbledore is willing to go to destroy me." Voldemort smiled, and just before he reached Harry, he vanished in a wisp of smoke. Harry stared, not believing that Voldemort would just leave so suddenly. He frantically began looking about, wand raised in readiness. He saw Neville standing over a body, doing as he was. Dumbledore also seemed to be waiting for the Dark Lord to make his next move. Yet none of them had expected what happened. Harry's scar suddenly surged with blinding agony. Harry fell to his knees, his wand falling out of his slack hands. It was simply the worst pain in his entire life. Harry could not move. His lungs were being compressed. His head squeezed so tightly that he thought for sure it was going to burst open. He could feel blood running down his forehead, and out of his nose. Inside his mind he saw those burning red eyes. The eyes that belonged to only one being in the entire universe. Those eyes were now pilfering through Harry's memories. "No!" Harry shouted. He focused all his remaining energy on ejecting the presence from his mind. But the Dark Lord was not moving. It showed him every horrible thing it could find. All the suffering he'd endured at the hands of his relatives. Cedric's death, Umbridge's tortures. Painful memory after painful memory. Then he spoke. Lord Voldemort spoke to Dumbledore with Harry's voice. "You wish to destroy me, Dumbledore, then kill me now. Strike the boy dead and kill me as well. Can you do it? Can you end his suffering?" Harry fought with everything he had left to push Voldemort out. His insides burned, and his vision blurred. He was losing, and he knew it. Snape had told him that Voldemort could drive a person insane by using their own thoughts and memories, and twisting them. He was now a believer. His memories became darker, more sinister than the actual events, and Harry was beginning to be unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. He began to wish for death, if only to end this. He wanted peace now. He squeezed his eyes shut and silently begged for Dumbledore to end it. "He wishes for you to do it, Dumbledore. Potter wants you to kill him. Will you do it? Give him the peace he yearns for." Voldemort laughed. "Yes. Yes, please God, yes. Kill me. End this. I can't fight. I'm tired. Please." Harry repeated over and over in his mind. He opened his eyes again and saw Dumbledore now kneeling in front of him, tears in his light blue eyes. "You can fight him, Harry," Dumbledore whispered. "You are so much stronger than he is." "The boy is weak," Voldemort said in Harry's voice. "He only wants death, Albus. Take his life, and end mine." He continued to taunt. "Come on, Harry." Harry turned and saw Neville. Neville, his friend, who grown so close to him this year. Neville who'd proven that he was so much stronger than anyone could have expected. The images in his mind began to fade, and Harry remembered laughing with Neville in their dormitory, or talking about homework on their way down to breakfast. as Hermione explained the finer points of their transfiguration work. Hermione. The sister he'd never had. So smart. How she had blossomed into the swan Harry always knew was there. He'd seen her and Neville come together. They completed some kind of puzzle. Hermione, without whom, Harry knew he never would have accomplished so much in his years at Hogwarts. He loved her. He loved Neville as well. And Ron. Ron. Yes, they'd grown apart this year, but it was always understood that they were friends. They always would be. That would never change. Ron made things easier to take. When things were bad, Ron helped to take his mind off of things. There was a bond that could never be broken by simple disagreements. That's what they had learned this year. That's what Daphne had made them discover. Daphne. Her beautiful face was now the only thing he could see in his head, and the pain surged again, making him double over. Daphne. She had taught him what love was. He now understood it. He ached for her. The way she would look at him from across the great hall when they could no longer enjoy meals together. How she tasted when she kissed him. Her lips so soft against his. But it was more than just physical things. It was deeper. Though he'd never be able to put into words what he felt. He only knew that when he was with her, no matter what the situation, he felt whole. He would give her anything she asked for. He would give his own life if it meant she would live. He would die to save her. He loved her with every fiber of his being. Ah! The scream echoed throughout the giant lobby, as Voldemort ripped himself out of Harry's mind. Harry felt the pain suddenly vanish as he stared up at the Dark Lord, who looked as if he'd been burned. He looked as if he was about to speak, but stopped at the voices. Hundreds of voices it seemed to Harry, who could see nothing, save for Voldemort's black robes. And then, he was gone. It was really him. I can't believe it. You know who? It's Bellatrix Lestrange. She's been killed. Dumbledore. Harry, are you all right, Harry? Dumbledore asked, ignoring the thousands of questions now being directed at him. What happened? Harry asked weakly. I think we have a lot to talk about, Harry. Much more than even I had thought. Dumbledore said sadly. I think first we should get you and your friends back to Hogwarts. Please like and subscribe.